Welcome to the show. I'm Antisocial. And this is the Antisocial Network.
I want to talk to her, but my face is up against the wall. Yeah, I think she wants to talk to me, but I'm antisociable. Yeah.
This week, I'm discussing the surge in anti-trans legislation being introduced nationwide, trans youth in sports, trans people in bathrooms, access to healthcare, and more. Buckle up, this is a long one. What the hell is going on in Arkansas? Are you guys okay? Not only has Arkansas already passed a bill barring trans athletes from competing in sports, they are now working on passing a bill that will ban all gender-affirming care for trans youth and eliminate public health insurance coverage for trans people of any age. This is not okay. Not only is preventing access to healthcare morally reprehensible, this is criminally negligent. Barring access to sports for kids is just punitively cruel, but also removing pathways to treatment for humans of any age is a literal death sentence. Trans people already experience depression, self-harm, and suicide at disproportionately higher rates than cis people, but tell them that they also can't get the help they deserve once they're legal adults, and literally what the fuck do trans children have to live for? I hate to be so hyperbolic and dramatic, but trans youth are already way more likely to die by suicide than non-trans youth. While also not okay, and still extremely detrimental to the health and safety of countless trans children, at least having adulthood to look towards is an attainable goal with an end date. For instance, a child might be told they can't get a tattoo or smoke cigarettes until they've reached maturity and are of legal age. Affirming a trans child's gender is in no way comparable to tattoos or smoking, and does not necessitate reaching maturity in order to validate. However, kids are already held to many restrictions due to their age. Don't even get me started on laws meant to require a parent's signature for a teen seeking an abortion. The point is, if we are telling trans youth in Arkansas that not only do they have to wait until they are adults to transition, but that once and if they do, their lives will be made infinitely more difficult and they probably won't be able to afford it anyway, then I ask you, what options are we leaving these children? I suppose God-fearing lawmakers of Arkansas believe that by barring access to trans healthcare, that they can stop transness. Are you trans and live in Arkansas and can't afford to transition? Well, I guess you're just going to have to keep your genitals and assigned gender at birth and suck it up then. I think that's what they actually think. That these people will just disappear and assimilate into cisness and heteronormativity. Some of you may be asking, wait, don't you mean Alabama? I thought Alabama was the state banning trans youth from sports. Or maybe Michigan? I was confused at first, too, until I realized that there are several states currently pushing anti-trans bills, including not only Alabama and Arkansas, but Hawaii, South Carolina, Texas, Montana, Michigan, and more. And if you're upset that I could confuse Alabama and Arkansas, then get your shit together. According to the Human Rights Campaign, there have been a whopping 82 anti-trans bills introduced into state legislatures across the country as of March 13th, 2021. Last month alone, South Carolina introduced HB 4047 and Texas introduced SB 1311, both banning medical care to transgender people, and Michigan introduced SB 218, an anti-trans sports bill. The HRC says that while anti-trans messaging has ramped up since 2015, we have seen nothing that compares to the current surge in anti-trans action we're seeing now. We should discuss the trans people in sports non-argument. Let's face it, the argument is rooted in misogyny and protecting the supposed innocence of cis women and girls. Even the Michigan GOP has stated, no transgender athletes in girls' sports. inferring the obvious. They don't think trans girls are real girls. If they did, their argument about protecting girls would be moot because they'd be forced to confront the fact that they are not protecting trans girls, who are real girls. Whenever I have a devil's advocate piece of shit come at me with transphobia veiled as an honest debate, they are so proud of themselves when they ask me, well, what about trans women in women's sports? Don't you think that would be unfair and harm female athletes? They're almost smug whenever they ask this. They think they're really clever and actually presenting a side of the argument I hadn't considered. Look, bro, I've been a female athlete, and I've played with trans women. I've also played roller derby in a co-ed game, competing against both men and women. And roller derby is not an endurance sport. It's a full contact sport, like football or rugby. So first of all, I'm uniquely qualified to speak to this specifically. And no, it does not pose a disadvantage or make the game unfair or imbalanced in any way. For one, roller derby is a simultaneously offensive and defensive game, allowing equal opportunity for both smaller and larger-bodied players to be successful. The game is largely based around skating ability, and there are rules in place to prevent dangerous tackles or hits. So, while a player might be 100 pounds heavier than me, or have more or less testosterone, it would not adversely affect the way the game is played. I could outskate them, and if they use their size to have an advantage, they are still subject to the same rules as all players, and can get penalized or ejected from the game. Whenever people, it's usually cis men, bring up the argument of, what about trans women in sports? They're merely revealing their bias towards women athletes in general. They don't think cis women are physically capable or adept, and that by introducing testosterone, we are naturally disadvantaged, which is just fucking false. They're the same dudes who will condescend to call women cute when they're exerting strength, because apparently strong women are an affront to men everywhere. If you are a strong woman, then you are either not actually strong, you're just cosplaying strongness and it's adorable, or you're too manly and bulking up is gross and only for guys. Men want women to be fit, but not strong. And they certainly don't see us as strong. That's why they find trans women in sports so laughable. They don't think trans women are real women, and they believe real women are weak. It's important to note that biology doesn't fucking matter. I've heard the argument that science supports the right for trans people to participate in sports because people's bodies physiologically change after transitioning or taking hormone treatments. For instance, a trans woman's muscle mass might significantly decrease after transitioning, making the argument that they had a disadvantage at sports irrelevant. However, it's crucial to recognize that using any form of biological justification can be harmful to trans people. Being trans is valid, period. With hormones, without them, with surgery, or without. Quote, passing or not. Whatever, it's all valid. But because it's cis people who perpetually insist on making these distinctions, and because there are so many laws being proposed right now, it's important to dissect this carefully, so that we can fully and entirely dismiss it as the horseshit that it is. Since a lot of transphobes who think they're having a conversation in good faith want to discuss chromosomes, let's go there. Many people who want to say that there are only two genders will point to the fact that women have XX chromosomes and men have XY. But these are not the only chromosome variations that occur in nature. Swyer syndrome, first described in 1955 in medical literature, is when a person has a chromosomal makeup of XY and female external genitalia. Intersex people have likely existed as long as people have existed, and Swyer syndrome is not the only example of intersex people. There are many known chromosome, hormone, and genital variations in humans. While some people want to write intersex people off as an anomaly, intersex people are real people and do exist. Contrary to popular belief, being intersex is not extremely rare. According to Amnesty.org, approximately 1.7% of the population is born with intersex traits. You may think that doesn't sound like a lot, but compare that with redheads, who make up 1 to 2% of the human population. You've certainly met someone with red hair in your life, or at least you've seen one on TV. So, clinging to the notion that chromosomal makeup defines gender is not just transphobic, it's factually incorrect. If you want to use science to defend your bigotry, at least use good science. In a blog post from the Scientific American published in the summer of 2019, author Simone DeSun says, "Stop using phony science to justify transphobia." The article explains the simplified and false notion that gender is determined by one thing, stating, "The popular belief that your sex arises from your chromosomal makeup is wrong. The truth is, your biological sex isn't carved into stone, but a living system with the potential for change." In addition to there being several variations of human chromosomal makeup, differing gene formations, such as the SRY, a gene on the Y chromosome, determine whether a human will have ovaries, testes, or neither. While the SRY gene often triggers the start of male gonads, it can produce different biological results and even stop functioning into adulthood, causing changes in gonads or resulting in a person exhibiting characteristics of the, quote, opposite sex. Basically what that means is your supposed biological sex or whatever can literally evolve over the course of your lifetime, all without any surgeries or hormone treatments. Just nature, baby. But as Simone DeSun says in her piece, when the biology gets too complicated, some point to differences between brains of males and females as proof of the sexual binary. It's not always transphobic people who want to believe that male and female brains are different. Sometimes even well-intentioned allies or advocates will point to brain differences in defense of reasons why trans bodies are valid. It usually takes the form of saying things like, "I have a man's brain trapped in a woman's body," or "Science says that male and female brains are different, so that is scientific proof of transness," or simply the age-old Lady Gaga adage, "born this way." But that messaging is uninformed and incomplete. As stated in the Scientific American, there is no such thing as the male brain or the female brain. While some would argue that there are observable differences between men and women's minds that are generally accepted, those could be due to any factors, such as nature or nurture, and pointing to biological sex or brain sex as the explanation for these differences is wrong and hinders scientific research. The Scientific American is not the only source asserting that biology has nothing to do with gender. Forbes, The Washington Post, The New York Times, Boston Review, and more have come out in recent years with articles saying essentially the same thing. In a Washington Post article from 2018 titled "Biology is Not Destiny, Seeking a Scientific Explanation for Trans Identity Could Do More Harm Than Good," author Alex Barash details how the LGBTQ+ community have often been victims of bad science. While many are quick to combat bad science with, quote, good science, with some studies pointing to anatomical proof of transness or even brain scans that can tell if a child is trans, Barash says that most people give too much weight to scientific explanations, believing social change to be inevitable once people just understand the science of it all. Unfortunately, the reality tends to be less cut and dry than that. Barash tells us, even if a precise biological origin for same-gender attraction or trans identity could be found, it would be far from an assurance of equality. And opponents to LGBTQ rights could just as readily see it as a defect in need of correction. The author is right. Scientific proof will not quell bigots. In fact, it might even bolster them. If you don't believe that, just look into Autism Speaks and the movement to eradicate autism for examples of how people can use science to perform euthanasia on undesirables. This topic is heavy. Let's go to break. Attention, leftist lovers! If you're single and ready to mingle, but none of the current dating apps appeal to your revolutionary sensibilities, then Mittens is the perfect app for you. Created by bummed Bernie bros out of work and without a cause, this dating app is unparalleled and teeming with wokeness. Matching you with other environmentally conscious, forward-thinking, and like-minded comrades, Mittens will make your sustainably sourced vegan heart pitter-patter. At Mittens, we're inclusive and intersectional, prioritizing BIPOC profiles, women, and the gender non-conforming, while Mittens only invites bisexual, queer, gender-fluid, trans, and non-binary men to join. Photos depicting mission trips, white saviorism, big cat petting, and brunch are strictly prohibited. Download Mittens and upload your voting history today to get started. If you love bundt cakes and true crime, you're going to want to stay tuned. If you find yourself staying awake late into the evening watching murder shows while baking, you need this subscription box, the Bunta Killer subscription box. We do hot takes on killer cakes. Every month you will receive a DVD outlining the gory details of one of the world's most notorious serial killers, and a new bundt cake recipe themed to that month's murder. Past popular cakes include BTK Bacon Maple, Raspberry Ramirez, Double Chocolate Charles Manson, and a holiday favorite, our Jean Bonnet Pineapple Pastry Cake. Combine two of your favorite pastimes today and bunt a killer! Do you sleep till noon, smoke 3 grams of weed, and then drink 2 pots of coffee and wonder why you're cranky? Do you sometimes miss the college lifestyle of making $20 last 13 days and searching for coins in the couch cushions? If you like to relive your glory days by binging on gas station 40s and overworking yourself without paying any attention to your basic needs, then food might be right for you. A classic standby, food solves many of life's day-to-day anxieties. Line too long at the ATM? Can't seem to find meaning in your average mundane existence? Have a snack! Adding food to your regular routine might just be the thing you need to keep going in your otherwise depressing and aggravating rat race of a life. Feeling rude, crude, and have a bad attitude? Try food! Available at a store near you. Welcome back. Aside from clinical definitions of intersex people and trans identities, many societies have recognized more than 2 genders for centuries. This notion that only 2 genders exist is a fairly new and very colonial Western way of thinking. Some Native and Indigenous nations have always recognized two-spirit individuals, people who embody both the feminine and masculine spirit and who have served a third gender ceremonial and social role in their communities. This idea of a two-spirited person is not one of a boy who wants to be a girl, but of a person who is both a boy and a girl. According to a PBS post in 2015 titled A Map of Gender Diverse Cultures, on nearly every continent and for all of recorded history, thriving cultures have recognized, revered, and integrated more than 2 genders. For instance, bakla is a Tagalog word used in the Philippines to describe a myriad of gender and sexual identities, but most often, a person with male genitalia who assumes the manners and dress of a woman. It is clear that a lot of transphobia stems from misunderstanding and fear. Let's discuss transphobia in general. There is a lot of confusion surrounding gender for cis people who have never had to question it. That's why for some, it's preposterous that they're being transphobic by saying they won't date a trans person. Look, they'll say, I'm straight. That doesn't mean I'm transphobic. As a standalone sentence, sure, being straight doesn't mean you're transphobic. Stipulating that you would not date a trans person because you're straight is transphobic. Here's why. If you're a man who is attracted to women, but is grossed out by the idea of dating a trans woman, why? But I don't like penises, they'll reason. Fine, I'm not partial to vaginas either, and I've never even kissed a woman, but would I date a trans man? Fuck yeah, I would. Why? Because I'm straight and I'm attracted to men. Have I ever had sex with a person with a vagina? No, but I'd figure it the fuck out if I fell in love with a trans man. This might not make sense to some of you, and that's fine. You don't have to date a person with certain genitals any more than you have to date outside your religion or your race. Having a preference is fine, but going out of your way to state that preference displays a level of ignorance and bigotry that you probably don't fully grasp. I've heard this argument from plenty of well-meaning, quote, progressive or woke types who still don't seem to understand gender. They say they're allies and that they support trans rights, but then without any irony say, but I won't date one, and not even hear themselves. I'm going to admit something I don't want to fucking say right now. But for the sake of transparency, and as a testament to the fact that people can change, I will admit that I was once transphobic. I did not understand that I was being transphobic. I think I just had a limited understanding of gender and sexuality, and I did not have a lot of experience interacting with queer people in general. Take, for example, when one of my college professors had a panel of queer people speak to us in class one day, including a trans woman who basically stole the show. I can't even remember who else was in the panel because everyone was transfixed on this woman. It was Chico, California in 2004. Once the panel of speakers was done, the teacher said to the class, "We'll now open the discussion for questions." My hand shot up in the air. I was the first to raise my hand and I was called on right away. I wanted to know if this trans woman, who had said she had a woman partner, considered herself gay or straight. She said, "I'm a lesbian," matter-of-factly, and after that about 10 more hands went into the air. I had opened the floodgates and everyone wanted to ask her more. What had been such an honest question at 19 years old now makes me cringe. I had only asked that question because I did not conceive how a person with a penis who slept with a woman could be gay. I was only beginning to learn about gender and queerness, and my question had been in earnest. So, likewise, when I wrote on Facebook 10 years later, thinking it was somehow a funny joke that I won't date transgender people because I'm straight, I thought it made sense. So much sense that it was laughable. Like, LOL, how could someone think I'm transphobic just for liking men with dicks? But that's not what straight means. Straight means I'm attracted to men. Men doesn't mean having a penis. It just doesn't. Get over it. If you feel compelled to make that distinction, sorry, you're just going to have to call yourself super straight now. Straight is reserved for people who think trans lives matter. When I made that Facebook comment, I was not fixated on the idea that trans men were not real men, or that they didn't have a penis. I think what confused me was that I recognized that transgender people fell under the queer umbrella, and because I didn't identify as gay, I thought I couldn't date trans people because I was not queer. Which is what I thought I was saying when I said, I don't date trans people because I'm straight. I thought that basically meant the same thing as saying, I am not queer, and queer people only date queer people. It was a critical gap in my understanding, a missing piece. Never mind the fact that gender and sexuality are spectrums, you can be socially queer, and as I would learn, I'm kind of the gayest straight person there is. We talked about trans people in sports, but we haven't talked about trans people in bathrooms. Before we were having this debate about trans youth in sports, people were having a fit about gender-neutral bathrooms. Again, mostly with the argument of protecting our children. It is bizarre to me that this debate even took place because trans people in bathrooms has nothing to do with pedophilia. And for this argument to go on for as long as it did, so publicly, complete with media coverage and public outrage, then surely that means one thing. Trans hate is totally normalized. Apparently, conflating trans people with pedophiles is a logical conclusion for some people. If it wasn't, they would be able to logically rationalize that an adult human, male or female, can use a public restroom without getting sexually aroused. The implication is that people, let's say it, cis women, will be put in danger if they use a bathroom with a trans woman, when the statistical truth is that it is way more likely that a trans woman would face violence for entering a men's restroom. These anti-trans laws are always introduced under the guise of protecting cis people from some phantom ill will that might be perpetrated by a trans person, while simultaneously causing actual harm to trans people in the process. The sad irony is that if legislation needs to be introduced to protect anyone in bathrooms, it's trans people. Furthermore, you've probably been in a bathroom with a trans person a dozen times and didn't know it, because you were just there to do your business. And if you were hypothesizing about what's between someone's legs in a public restroom, then maybe you're the fucking pervert. Recently, Elliot Page made international headlines when he came out as trans, and is now arguably the most visible male trans celebrity. As noted in Page's recent Time magazine interview, trans boys have less role models to look to growing up. While the PBS post I referenced earlier shows a map of societies across the globe that recognize a diverse range of genders, rarely are women who encompass male attributes mentioned. As explained in the Elliot Page Time magazine article, historically, trans women have been more visible in culture and in Hollywood than trans men. There are many explanations. Our culture is obsessed with femininity. Men's bodies are less policed and scrutinized. Patriarchal people tend to get more emotional about who is considered to be in the same category as their daughters. The article points to the fact that we live in a society where masculinity is the norm, and so trans men are able to exist without taking up as much of the public's attention. After all, the people against gender-neutral bathrooms aren't concerned about trans men in men's restrooms or trans men on men's sports teams. They're more concerned with trans women in women's bathrooms and trans women playing women's sports. Or, God forbid, a trans woman somehow tricking them into a non-consensual sexual encounter, which, by the way, is the last thing a trans person wants to do to an aggressively straight dude who might commit an act of violence against them. Furthermore, if you're attracted to trans women, that's not their fault. When men imply that they're fearful a trans woman might deceive them into some sort of relationship, what they're actually saying is that they're attracted to trans women and that makes them mad. It's not trans people's fault that you find transness, cross-dressing, androgyny, or gender queerness unsettling. That's on you, dude. This year, on March 31st, Trans Visibility Day, Shea Butter Femme posted about the importance of action and intersectionality on their Instagram, citing the fact that cis people love to obsess over trans magazine covers and TV show stars, yet still do nothing to relinquish power or give money to actual trans people. I felt called out. After all, I had fangirled over the new Time magazine issue with Elliot Page, running to my local Barnes & Noble for the first time in at least a year to buy not only one, but 2 copies. I honestly felt proud of spending my money on it, as if my measly 2-copy purchase would send some silent signal to Time that I approved of them covering trans lives, without ever grasping the irony of the fact that sending $14 to a trans person's GoFundMe would likely have gone much farther and done more in terms of actually supporting trans people. Don't get me wrong, I also send money to trans GoFundMes, and you should too. Trans Santa, a gift-giving project started by India Moore, became wildly successful this past year, matching generous donors with trans youth and young adults in need. But you shouldn't wait until next Christmas if you can afford to help today. I prefer to give to creators I follow on Instagram or TikTok, or if a GoFundMe comes across my feed and I can afford it, I'll give. Sending a stranger $20 for gender-affirming care or surgery, or for essentials during a housing crisis, can mean more than you will ever know. If you don't have money to give, there are still a myriad of ways to show support and solidarity. Because so many states are trying to pass anti-trans bills right now, you can call elected officials and get involved in media and phone banking campaigns. And most importantly, something everyone can do is speak up. This wave of anti-trans bills are not being pushed by constituents. They are being funded and pushed by big religion and corporate interests. Polls from the fall of 2020 showed that Trump supporters largely favored LGBTQ rights. In fact, the study showed that 60% of Trump supporters in swing states believe in trans equality, including the issues of trans individuals serving in the military and gender-neutral bathrooms. Essentially, a majority of Americans believe in supporting and validating trans identities, and much of the proposed legislation is engineered by corporate elites trying to sow discord and steamroll their private agendas. It is important also to remember that trans violence and discrimination can disproportionately affect already marginalized groups. An Instagram post by @them on Trans Visibility Day reminds us that anti-trans sports bills aren't just transphobic, they're racist too. There is a long history of excluding black girls from sports and policing our bodies, says Terry Myler, a sprinter from Connecticut. I am a runner and I will keep running and keep fighting for my existence, my community, and my rights. The post goes on, she's right. Black women in sports, whether they are cis, trans, or intersex, constantly encounter shifting rules and expectations as a reprimand for their successes. They're accused of doping or cheating in order to win. People make cruel remarks about their perceived femininity and create racist depictions of their physicality, all in attempts to discourage and exclude them from competing, and ultimately to keep them from winning. This wave of anti-trans sports bills working their way through state legislatures are fueled not only by misconceptions about who trans people are, but by fears of black bodies. The recent Time magazine article on Elliot Page acknowledges these differences. Not only is Page privileged because he is famous, with a team of people who helped to both coordinate and protect him during the coming out process, with the Netflix hit Umbrella Academy even changing their credits the same day to reflect Page's name change, Elliot Page is privileged in other ways. As the article states, and I previously mentioned before, male bodies are not as policed as female bodies, and are also deemed less threatening to patriarchal gatekeepers and their daughters. But also, Page is white. All of these factors are things that may not have made Page's public transition any easier, but they certainly made it safer. Trans women, and trans women of color, are often the ones who receive the brunt of transphobia, are scapegoated by bigots, and victims of violence and murder. While some are still sitting in the afterglow of their Biden dysphoria, let's not forget the ways in which Kamala Harris actively harmed trans women and sex workers during their time as a California elected official. While serving as California's Attorney General in 2015, Harris supported the denial of gender-affirming healthcare to a trans woman being held in a men's prison. At Shea Butterfemme on Instagram, in her Trans Visibility Day post, shed light on the violence and discrimination Black trans women often face when being unfairly incarcerated in all-male prisons. Shea Butterfemme cites their friend Ashley Diamond, a Black trans woman incarcerated in a men's facility in Georgia and who lives in fear daily. So, besides donating money, following trans creators, educating yourself and others, staying vocal and speaking up when you witness injustice, what else can you do? Well, you can experiment with your own gender. Even the woman who is attributed with creating the now famous gender reveal party has stated publicly many times that she now regrets it. Having learned more about trans and non-binary identities, and having a non-binary child herself, has changed her mind about the harmful and frankly unnecessary decision to declare and celebrate a baby's perceived gender identity. So I say, fuck around with your gender. Typically femme presenting? Buy a necktie. Bolo ties are pretty cute too. Suspenders? What the hey? And are you typically male presenting? What will a little eyeliner hurt? Or some early 2000s era face glitter. Hell, wait till you try skirts. If you experiment with your gender and discover you are trans, yay, that's great. If you experiment with your gender and realize you are cis, then hey, at least now you're doing it on purpose. And you might find out you look great in that thing you've always wanted to try. Bottom line, we need to stop framing gender in such a narrow way and acting like cis and straight are the norm. Scientific explanations or justifications are irrelevant when we consider the moral imperative of treating every human with dignity and respect. That's my show. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Antisocial, and this is the Antisocial Network. For even more access to me, Antisocial, follow me on Instagram at the Antisocial Network or catch me on the app Stereo. If you want to support my content creation dreams and help make them a reality, you can also subscribe to my Patreon for only $5 to receive 2 extra bonus episodes a month. And while supplies last, new subscribers will receive 2 different Antisocial Network stickers and a handmade zine made by me and packed with even more super secret content and never before seen photos. To sign up, head to patreon.com/theantisocialnetwork and get bonus episodes today. Listen to the story of the time I made Mark Maron laugh, or hear me read poetry. Later this month, patrons will have access to a bonus episode featuring stories of my time working at Disneyland and meeting Molly Shannon. All of this and more if you join me on patreon.com. See you next Wednesday. Later!
But I'm antisociable, yeah.